if you don't develop, something of your own, kind of go down that route, like this is kind of the rut you can get stuck in a large corporate job,
Let's start with where you grew up and tell us a little bit of context from the early days.
Yeah, for sure. So, hey guys, great to meet everyone. My name's Deuskar. My where I grew up. So I actually grew up not too far from here. My parents and I were in Roswell and Alpharetta area. So for those that are familiar, it's about 25 or 30 minutes north of here. Yeah, elementary school, middle school, high school, et cetera, was all done up there. So I consider myself an Atlanta native. I'm not from here, but my parents moved here when I was a year old, and so I've grown up in the suburbs, spent a lot of time around Atlanta. And like JP said, eventually ended up going to Georgia Tech. So Atlanta's very near and dear to my heart. Very close to my family. I've loved the city and kind of everything that it has to offer. So it was a pretty easy decision for me to try to like plant my flag here and try to build a career out of Atlanta.
So tell me about like high school. Like what are some of the interests and paths and things and activities that you were doing, back then that may or may not have influenced, the path to today?
Yeah, my story's kind of funny. I was what I call like a late bloomer. I was kind of floating, coasting through school and life in middle school, even into high school. Didn't really have a lot of ambition or direction. Something changed, I think, around 10th grade for me specifically, where I started to develop more of like, hey, I actually want to go do something with my life and develop an interest in, specific kind of domains. There's a specific figure, a mentor of mine that I met during around that time of my life. He's part of the Indian community, Marathi community, and was actually a former professor at Georgia Tech and Polytechnic as well. After he retired, he spent, all day, every day, basically just mentoring kids in like my community, just out of like passion. He loves to teach, kids. And I kind of found my way to him and working with him over the weekends and just like, frankly, at that time I was kind of behind in school grades wise and not doing the best. And so starting to study with him and learning, everything from like geometry to algebra to calculus and just kind of learning the value of hard work more than anything and studying. I think that's kind of what I got out of that. So I distinctly remember that period in sophomore year for me in high school where, I started to become very focused on working and developing my skill sets, starting to figure out what I wanted to do with my time and ideally my career as I went into college. And then the next couple of years really started to work hard to play catch up, frankly, to a lot of my peers. Started to develop ambitions. Both his kids ended up going to MIT and have had very successful careers. So I always kind of looked up to that story and started to develop a little bit of a interest in trying to figure out, can I make it to MIT, Stanford, some of these really top-notch schools. Obviously, Georgia Tech was there. We'll get into it. That didn't pan out the way I really hoped, and it sent me down another path. But I'm kind of glad those things kind of worked out.
Do you feel like, a couple of us, maybe a couple hundred of us have Indian parents. Do you feel like the pressure of school and degree and any of that shaped kind of that direction? Or do you felt like from 10th grade, getting some direction for yourself kind of led you on the path of what you wanted to achieve?
My dad was actually pretty influential, and I'll give him a lot of credit for pushing me down the route of entrepreneurship. He was always in my ear, and one of the things I was doing around that time was starting to do internships in high school. So I did one at AT&T. I did one at a company called CBON, which is another big telecom company here in the Southeast. And the one thing I was kind of into on the side was building software, right? Making websites. The iPhone had come out, I think, in 2007.
Yeah.
Xcode came out like a year or two after. So like the App Store was starting to become a thing around then. And I was really I loved the iPhone when it came out. I was obsessed with it. So immediately I was like, how do I start building apps for this thing? That was one passion I kind of had on the side. And my dad actually, he was pretty influential in this time because he was the one that got me the internship at AT&T. He worked there. And I was in a cubicle working 9 to 5 every day, right? And just writing code and being handed tickets. And I hated the experience. Me and him used to ride to work every day and then ride back. And I used to complain to him in the car every day. And it was funny. His reaction was he used to smile because he's like, this is what I want. He was kind of doing that on purpose. He's like, if you don't develop, something of your own, kind of go down that route, like this is kind of the rut you can get stuck in a large corporate job, a large company like AT&T. I'm not here to down all big companies, but that was kind of the culture that existed at AT&T at the time. It had become very corporate. So he had a big influence on me to try to push me towards entrepreneurship. And so as I started to develop some of these skill sets and technology, et cetera, it started to become a little bit more clear over the next couple of years.
So, making a decision, you apply to all these different schools, you end up choosing Georgia Tech. Walk us kind of through why Tech, other than being in Atlanta, and why obviously computer science. I think there's obviously a connection between having fun and hey, maybe I should do computer science. Walk us through kind of that decision making process.
Yeah, so I remember, 10th grade, 11th grade was working my ass off, SAT, doing extracurriculars, all the stuff that you do when you're trying to get into a good school, and ultimately ended up applying to MIT, Stanford, Harvard, Georgia Tech, Cornell, and Berkeley. Didn't get into any of the top ones I wanted, frankly. I got into Cornell, and then I got a basically full ride or president's scholarship offer to Georgia Tech. And so like the conversation was clear. My dad's like, I'm not paying for you to go to Cornell. You have free school here at Georgia Tech. And it's a good school, obviously. That was just me, being young and kind of getting very fixated on, frankly, what seems like a stupid goal at that point. In hindsight, I can sit here and say it really doesn't matter at the end of the day, as long as you go to school and you do a good job and you find that interest. So, but at that time, like it meant everything to me. I remember the day I got the rejections, probably like cried in my room for like 2 days.
Mm.
So it was like a complete, different perspective at that time of my life. But that forced me, frankly, down to Georgia Tech. I was very unhappy with the decision. I was like, I kind of wrote off school at that point. I was like, I worked so hard for the last 3 years, didn't end up getting what I wanted ultimately. Screw school. I'm gonna go figure out how to do this entrepreneurship thing. So it really shifted my mindset as I went into Georgia Tech. Obviously, tried hard in school pretty early on, but I got very intentional about trying to figure out how do I find a co-founder? How do I develop some domain expertise as a young student? Never worked a real job or in a real industry. How do I kind of figure out the logical steps to go and starting my own business eventually?